Hi, my name is Alex Nicol, and welcome to my presentation on diversity and access to education in Rwanda, which I've prepared for the Comparative International Education course at the Monterey Institute of International Studies. In this presentation, I'll be covering the impact that 5 dimensions of diversity have on access to education in Rwanda. These are ethnicity, gender, students with disabilities, orphans and vulnerable children, and the rural and urban divide. Throughout the presentation, I will be looking at the trends that affect access in these areas, government policies and NGO responses to these issues, and also challenges and future directions that the country should take to address any imbalances affecting access. The first dimension that I chose to look at is ethnicity, because the 1994 genocide is one of the first things that people associate with Rwanda. Now, there haven't been any records kept on ethnicity since the end of the genocide in 1994. This is because the recording of ethnicities and the general favoring of certain ethnicities over others was one of the root causes of the genocide. Here you have an identity card which, if we were able to zoom in, it would show that this individual was marked as a Tutsi. Because it's not immediately apparent the distinctions between Hutus and Tutsis, it was determined that these cards should be done away with, and that the entire concept of ethnicity should be done away with to avoid future conflict. However, unofficially, estimates are that there are 90% Hutu, 9% Tutsi, and 1% Twa ethnicity in the general population of 11 million people. Now, the Twa people are an indigenous people that have been the most negatively affected by land redistribution in recent years. This has left a lot of them landless. It's estimated about half of them are landless, and within their population, many of them are uneducated. Around 91% of Twa have had no formal education. There's a lot of discrimination against the Twa in the formal education system, and as a result, very few Twa children actually go to school. They're more likely to only receive education from their families and immediate communities. Now, the government policy, as we mentioned, is one that ignores ethnicity in any way, shape, or form. Ethnicity is thought to create divisionism. The only times in which ethnicity is really mentioned is during these sort of dramatizations of the conflicts that are caused by ethnicity. These dramatizations take place at schools throughout the year to show students the evils of discussing ethnicity. So ethnicity is not talked about in schools, and officially there are no barriers to ethnicity. Or no barriers to education based on ethnicity, but of course there is de facto discrimination towards the Twa minority in particular. Looking at the NGO response, it's interesting to note that because of the laws against speaking about ethnicity, there's really very limited NGO response. NGOs are excluded from engaging in advocacy. The government refuses to grant tax-exempt status to NGOs that mention indigenous peoples, and consequently there's very few efforts to aid Twa children. One quote from the Secretary General of Rwanda Ministry of Justice sort of sums it up. He said that such ethnic divisions have only caused conflicts between the people of this country. It is now time to pass over these petty differences and pursue the goal of national unity that will benefit everyone in Rwanda. And that was after he had revoked the license for an NGO that was advocating on behalf of Twa children. So what are some challenges and future directions regarding access for different ethnicities in Rwanda? Basically, the main challenge is that the Twa people are going to continue to face discrimination unless there's a shift in government policy to allow recognition of ethnic groups, which seems unlikely in the immediate future. Now, moving on to an area, dimension of diversity in which Rwanda has actually done a very good job of creating balance is in terms of gender in education. Currently, girls outnumber boys in primary enrollment. However, this trend does reverse once students reach high school, and is even more pronounced once students reach higher education, where two-thirds of higher education students are male. Women are also underrepresented in STEM education. Now, if we look at the table here, it shows that over the period of time between 2001 and 2005, there were some slight increases in female enrollment in university, and then some decreases, and basically this trend has continued until the present day. So government policy on girls' education has called for increasing teacher training on gender issues, increasing the share of female teachers, and increasing the proportion of female secondary students who study STEM subjects. We can see that over the categories here, from primary to higher education, the percentage of female students compared to boys tends to decline. And so the government is making efforts to address this decline, primarily through some innovative affirmative action policies, which we'll talk about in a minute. There's also a large response from the NGO community. The NGO community works within and outside the formal sector. There's a huge initiative called the Rwanda Girls Initiative, which brings together many of the key stakeholders in education to discuss issues of gender and equality. And they provide also an all-girls school, mentoring opportunities, and scholarships for girls to attend higher education institutions. And Girls Hub Rwanda is also a major NGO operating in the country that's part of a strategic collaborative between Nike and the British Agency for Foreign Aid, and they're part of the Girl Effect movement, looking to boost women's education based on their contributions to the economy. So challenges and needs in this sector. Although Rwanda's done a good job of achieving parity at the lower levels, they need to increase the number of female teachers, especially in the secondary and tertiary level. There also need to be more female secondary schools, and they need to focus more on the affirmative action policies that would allow them to admit female students with somewhat lower test scores to higher education institutions on the condition that they can complete some remedial courses in their first year. And one university currently has a policy of that nature. That's the Kigali Institute of Science and Technology. And you can see here that there is a disparity, this is in 2005, in terms of the STEM subject matter courses. All right, moving on to students with disabilities. So in this regard, there's very little data to tell us whether or not the government is doing a good job of creating equal access to education. There aren't any official statistics. However, it is estimated that approximately 105,000 children between the ages of 15 and 14 have some form of disability. So government records only indicate that 1,700 students with disabilities are enrolled in school, which gives you an idea of the scale of the data that is missing. There are extremely high barriers to inclusion. These include the stigmatization of students with disabilities, the distance to schools in many rural areas, which make it difficult for students with disabilities to access them, and also lack of resources on the part of the community, NGOs, and the government itself. So government policy towards students with disabilities has been clearly outlined regarding students that are entering university. However, the policy that's in place, or has been in place since 2008, has not resulted in very dramatic numbers of students attending higher education institutions. In fact, in 2008, only 15 blind, 6 deaf, and 1 impaired student entered university. In terms of wording in the policies themselves, there's little mention of disability directly. In fact, in many instances, students with disabilities are lumped together with all categories of vulnerable children, including the very poor, and also are lumped together with orphans and vulnerable children, which we'll talk about in a minute. The NGO response in this sector has been limited by financial constraints. However, there are efforts to rally around a newly formed National Union of Disabilities Organizations. This will help give the 8 main NGOs operating in the country currently a platform with which to address issues of access for students with disabilities. Some of their main initiatives include teaching sign language and Braille, and also giving students the ability to engage in microfinance through training of some skills-based education. For instance, in this picture here, we have this is a graduation of a group of students who were being trained on using crocheting and knitting to create income for themselves, so that they could attend school. So future directions, there's a need obviously to collect reliable data on the number of students that are disabled in the country. There's a need to conduct sensitization campaigns to reduce discrimination against disabled students. There's a need to promote inclusion as the preferred method of education for all students with disabilities. And there's also a need to promote mobile programs to reach students with disabilities who cannot travel to the local schools. And the country has been doing that with ICT, and it's something that they need to look into with disability as well. Moving on to look at orphans and vulnerable children. This is a category where the current trends show that there are over 2.8 million orphans and vulnerable children. This is largely a result of parents who have died from AIDS, and also children who are still impacted from the '94 genocide. So these categories, show that it's a huge problem, and the government has made some efforts to address it. Primarily, the government policy is to integrate OVCs into the formal education system, to conduct a sensitization campaign to reduce discrimination against OVCs, and the government is also working with NGOs to promote non-formal education opportunities and create community support for OVCs. Now, specifically what these NGOs are doing, they're launching mentoring campaigns which match child-headed households with mentors. Many of the vulnerable children are actually heads of their own households. Community mentors can help these children by advocating for them to stay in school, advocating for school officials to pay more attention to them. And there has also been the establishment of some low-cost non-formal education centers which make some skills-based education available to students, particularly in the mornings, so that if they need to then go work in the afternoons, they have that time available. So challenges, obviously there's still a huge number of orphans and vulnerable children, and 4 out of 5 of them who do attend formal education are over age for the grade level. Many of them have to repeat grade, and when they are over age, it's highly correlated with them dropping out. So the conclusion here is that the access strategies are working, but that now the focus needs to be on retaining these students in education. As you can see here, that there's many students who are not at their appropriate grade level and need to be given some form of remedial education to prevent them from dropping out. Okay, moving on to our last category, looking at the rural and urban divide. This has been an issue largely in terms of primary school completion rates. Because the southern portion of the country is so much poorer than the capital, Kigali, and many other regions, there's been a much higher, it's been much more difficult to get teachers into the schools there. There's a higher student-to-teacher ratio, up to 60-to-1 in the southern province, and primary completion rates are among the worst in the country. Only about 42% of students actually graduate from primary school in the southern region. 58% of students graduate in the southern region versus 76% for the wealthy. All right, now I'm looking at government policy. All schools receive the same teacher stipends and the capitation grant for supplies. PTAs are allowed to make additional contributions to the schools, and this has been an issue in that wealthier school districts are able to provide greater resources to their students. In some cases, this results in teachers in urban areas getting paid 3 times more than teachers in rural areas. Teachers in rural areas have higher absenteeism, usually less qualified, and the quality of education in rural areas is negatively impacted as a result. Now, looking at the NGO response to this issue, there are a number of NGOs operating in the rural areas. However, they're mostly concerned with providing indirect forms of school materials such as uniforms, textbooks, pencils, and things like that, rather than actually providing formal education. And furthermore, most of them suffer from very low funding. Here you can see in this chart that this district Kikokiro, which is an urban district, received much more funding directly to the schools from NGOs than did a rural district, even though they have greater need. So some future directions here. This is a bus that brings ICT resources to students in rural areas, so that they can become trained on things like computer usage. And there needs to be some solutions developed to reduce the indirect cost of schooling for rural families. We need to develop infrastructure so that students can benefit from ICT, and there need to be incentives provided for teachers to go to rural areas and remain there to increase the quality of education in rural districts. So thank you for listening to my presentation. For a list of references, please visit the website below. I hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to your comments.